Afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this special episode of our association leadership series, Building Maintenance Best Practices, Structural Repairs, and the 40-50-year recertification program. My name is Craig Vaughn. I'm the CFO of Castle Group and one of its founders. I am joined today by Jeff Rembaum, and welcome back, Jeff, and his partner, Lisa McGill of KBR. And then we have special guest today, Tim Marshall, who's a principal of AT Designs. Tim is a professional engineer, and he's going to shed some light on the recertification program for us today. Welcome, everybody. Jeff, everybody knows you, so I'm going to give you a quick second to introduce yourself, and then I'll move on to Lisa and Tim. So, Jeff?
You got it. Everybody knows K. Bender Rembaum is a community association law firm. We represent over 1,400 associations around the state. We're 20 lawyers, 9 of whom are board certified. Hopefully that number will increase very soon. And I'm going to do a short introduction today because we have a full agenda.
Lisa?
Well, thanks for participating today. It's a very important topic. All of you need to be aware of your responsibilities and of this program itself. So I thank you, Craig, for setting it up and inviting me to participate.
Lisa, thanks a lot. Tim, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself and the firm, but before I do that, it looks like we have your son's picture, so maybe you can update the picture before we finish the webinar today. Tim, a little bit about yourself and TA Designs.
Yes, my name is Tim Marshall. I appreciate being here. I'm the president of AT Designs. We've been in business since 1986. I'm a licensed structural engineer in the state of Texas and Florida. We've been doing concrete restoration and exterior facade rehabilitation, windstorm damage reports and assessments since Andrew. I'm here to present to you my expertise on this subject, and I appreciate being invited in as one of the panel experts.
Well, Tim, thanks for joining us. I want to remind everybody that Jeff, and I got the firm name wrong right off the bat after we just talked about it, so I do apologize. I did want to remind everybody that Jeff and Lisa and Tim are here to provide their opinion on the items that we are going to talk about. They are not advisors specifically for your association and giving advice specifically for your association. A reminder that you can chat in your questions, and we will try and fit those into the dialogue today. And if we have time at the end, we'll also come back and answer some specific questions. Before we get to the agenda, though, I do want to acknowledge the horrific situation that continues in Miami regarding Champlain Tower South. Of course, our thoughts and prayers go out to those families affected by this tragedy, and our special thanks to the first responders who are working on site and behind the scenes. Today, we will not talk about the circumstances surrounding Champlain, nor will we speculate on any causation of the collapse there. It's far too early, and we won't take any questions on Champlain. So I just wanted to get that out, and let's move on. We're going to talk, we're going to do a little polling today. So let's start with our first question. Ness, if you could post the first question. Let's just find out who's in our audience today. And while we do that, I just want to run through the agenda, the things we're going to talk about. Of course, the topic is building maintenance best practices, standard structural repairs, in the 40 to 50 year recertification program. The plan is to cover the certification process, the responsibility of associations for building maintenance, and then building maintenance best practices. So those are the things we're going to cover today. Ness, before we get there, can you post the results of the survey? And let's see who we're listening today. Who's listening in today, excuse me. Everybody can see that. So we have, 75% condos and 25% HOAs with a few co-ops in there as well. And then we also asked, if you live in a condominium, how old is your building? So, boy, a lot of them greater than 30 years old. So right in the sweet spot for the certification program that we're going to talk about. Less than 10 years old, just a few. 10 to 20 years old, 16%. 20 to 30, 12, and the bulk over 30 years old. I do want to tell our listeners today, while we're going to talk about who the recertification program specifically affects, but notwithstanding that, there are a lot of good best practices that can come out of the whole process of engaging an engineer and inspecting your building or amenity. So I think the topic is relevant to everybody. So let's jump in. The requirement to complete a 40 to 50-year certification is actually not found in 718 or 720 or 719. It is a requirement of the county in which the building resides. At this time, it only applies to Dade and Broward. So Lisa, first question for you, do I have that right? Is it only Dade and Broward? And also, is it possible that your documents require you to complete a periodic engineering inspection?
Thank you. The program actually started in Miami-Dade County sometime in the 70s, and it was later adopted in Broward County in response to several structural failures. But you have to take into consideration that every building, regardless of the type of use, is subject to the Florida Building Code. So compliance, maintenance, and maintaining the safety of the building is actually paramount, one of the paramount goals of the code. As far as the documents are concerned, I'm sure you can imagine attorneys across the country are grappling with this horrific problem. I mean, and anticipated problems somewhere else, and under no circumstances does anybody want this to happen again. So while I haven't seen any requirements in the governing documents, I see no reason why a community that's concerned about its future, or developers that are concerned about the future of the buildings that they build, could not include a requirement for periodic inspections or minimum reserve requirements, and those reserves would not be subject to the waiver set forth in 718, and they wouldn't even be set forth to the use for alternative purposes upon the vote of the member. So I think we're going to probably wind up seeing many associations try to incorporate some safety concerns into their documents, into their existing documents.
I think that the legislature and the building departments might beat us to that. But Jeff, what do you think? Do you think we're going to see some legislative changes as a result of the current environment we're in?
I think we will. The question is whether or not we'll see an overreach. I think that we might see some change to the reserve requirements and the categories of reserves, that there could be engineering certifications that come back into the legislation, and we'll talk about what happened in the past in Chapter 718 in just a little while. I think we might even see liability for failing to conduct certain activities, such as the certification and reserve studies. It'll be interesting to see how the Florida legislature approaches this. But right now, with only Miami-Dade and Broward requiring the recertifications at 40 years, it raises questions. When should they occur? Is 40 years too long already? So we'll see some legislation, I think. I'm just curious as to how deep it'll go and whether we'll have to tailor it back in years to come.
Right. I think it's a good point. And again, to reiterate, currently this only affects the absolute requirement to do a recertification only affects Dade and Broward. We had a lot of questions about, what's Palm Beach going to do, and nobody knows what they're going to do. But again, there's some best practices that come out of the process.
Greg, there is some chatter that Palm Beach County has been tinkering around with passing an ordinance dealing with the certification. It hasn't happened yet. I suspect Palm Beach County and all of the counties really can act a whole lot faster than our state legislature. So we may see some local ordinances happen first. And also want to point out that in case anybody is looking for Tim later, Tim's company is AT Designs.
Yes, that's an error on my part, and I apologize. Lisa, I was a little bit confused about the title. I know a lot of these now in the paper, you're reading a lot about 40 and 50-year recertification program. I really only knew it as a 40-year recertification program, but why do they mention 50 years now?
Well, the name of the program really is the Building Safety Inspection Program, and it's required to be performed at 40 years from the date of the certificate of occupancy. So you say recertification. When a building is built, it is certified by the local building department for occupancy purposes. After 40 years, the building department wants some assurances that the building is still safe for its intended use. And then in both counties, Miami-Dade and in Broward, you have to go through this process again every 10 years after the initial 40-year certification.
So that's why 40, 50, and then theoretically 60, 70, whatever the time frame is. Okay, good. Well, I appreciate that. It doesn't affect all buildings, as I understand. Jeff, can you tell me who's affected by who's required to do the process?
Well, as it relates to Miami-Dade, sure. Essentially, it's all buildings except single-family residences, duplexes, and minor structures that have been in existence for 40 years or more. A minor structure is really basically a building that is designed for 10 or less people that does not have more than 2,000 square feet gross area. So if you don't meet in one of those exceptions, then you're going to be in the 40-year recertification.
So if I'm an HOA in Miami-Dade, I probably am not required to do a recertification of my amenity center.
Well, let's plug that into all buildings except single-family residence, duplexes, and minor structures. So I think that the clubhouse could absolutely have to be recertified based on this language.
Tim,
I
your thoughts?
think it goes to a residential dwelling, 2 stories or less, maybe 3 stories, is really where they're, multifamily and anything like that takes over. So I think that's what they're kind of anything bigger than a single family dwelling.
Okay, good.
In Broward,
yeah.
buildings less than 3,500 square feet are not subject to the 40-year inspection, but and single-family homes are likewise exempted out from the inspection, but all other buildings, both commercial and residential.
So that includes the HOA clubhouse amenity centers for the most part.
Yeah.
Depending on the size, of course.
Which is good. I think we're going to talk about best practices, and these are significant facilities that suffer some of the same pains that high-rise condos suffer, but we'll get into that later. Jeff, if I'm in Miami-Dade and Broward and I have to have a recertification, am I notified by the county, or am I on my own to schedule and remember when I was built and all of those types of things?
Yes to both. Yes to both, because there are requirements, right, for the 40-year certification. You need to be reaching out to an engineer such as Tim in order for compliance. But at that 40-year mark, you will receive a letter from the jurisdiction, from the local government, reminding you of what you need to do. At least you're supposed to anyway.
And if you don't get that notification, it doesn't waive your requirement to have it performed.
Yeah, exactly. So I think for our listeners, it's a 40-year certification requirement. It's not like it creeps up on you. We're going to talk about getting well in advance of that, but a good part of your strategic plan should be knowing these dates and knowing some of the key, milestones, if you will. Okay, Tim, let's jump to you. As an association, and we required to do recertification, we need to engage an engineer. What should we consider when selecting one?
Well, their expertise, number one, 2, the location. Also, on this particular program, there are multiple issues required in the recertification, the type of building, the intensity, the age of the building. A lot of condominiums will start this process at 30 years to address, because quite frankly, this recertification program is really a report card for the structural integrity of the building given to the building department, so they now know that there are issues. And so a lot of associations are proactive in starting at the 30-year, 35-year and doing this to make sure that all their issues are taken care of. But structural engineers, people that specialize in concrete restoration and things of that nature should be doing it. And it can go from a single proprietorship to a large engineering firm. So you have that. Generally, the larger the buildings, it's going to take more manpower, more time, which right now with the onslaught of forcing this to happen, a lot of engineering firms are going to get booked out very early. And then a product of that is when they're booked out, if there is damage, the restoration companies to fix the damage are going to get booked out. So, it by all means right now is pay now or pay later, really. So to be proactive is absolutely a cost savings here.
That's a good point. And I see that the majority of our condos that are listing are greater than 30 years old. So that's the sweet spot, it sounds like, to kind of start the process. So Tim, I've asked you for a bid. I've agreed to pay your small stipend for the engineering 40-year recertification report. What are you going to do? Walk us through what's involved in the process. What are you looking for? What are you looking at? Is there a checklist? Can you give us the narrative?
Both the Broward and Miami-Dade have checklists as part of their report process. If we look at the 40-year certification, I'm kind of a different school in the sense that we have to cover all the required statutory requirements, but also too, in this climate right now, is a visual verification that that the integrity of the main structural elements are intact. So as the 40-year certification requires a more intensive overview of the reinforced or post-tension structures, right now where Broward, Dade, and Palm Beach are all asking to have a structural integrity inspection, which would inquire looking at all the roof structures, looking at all the stairwells, looking at the parking garages, underground parking, the first level columns, and an exterior facade to try to identify conditions that may jeopardize the integrity of the structure. For the 40-year certification, it's much more detailed. They want to know, they want you to do samplings of balconies. They want you to go essentially everywhere so you can assess the condition, note them, photograph them, and then certify that work and turn it into the municipality, the county, Broward County, Dade County, and soon to be probably Palm Beach County. So they get a report card. So they all of a sudden know nothing about your building, and now they know that there is integrity issues with your building, and then they start watching you. There's a time frame to address them and things of that nature.
So you've completed your report, and I guess that naturally leads to what has to be done to restore, if there's damage, the structural integrity of the facility. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
So there's that process.
Well, one thing is to fix a building, you have to identify it, and then you've got to quantify it, because the repair of the structural elements, and again, too, we're talking about structure here because I'm a structural engineer, but this is also electrical requirements. It's very important. This is a 40-year structural and electrical assessment of the building. So I'm just talking about the structural aspect. So, let's just say a condo A hires me. I go out and say, you've got a couple columns in the garage, you have a column on the pool deck, and then you have a elevator structure on the roof that, has some significant issues that we need to address. That in a quarter won't be able to get your phone call anywhere. What needs to happen is you need to quantify the damage, because we have to send out the bids to the contractors. They base their bid on the specification based on quantities, and then you go to bid and fix. And then Broward County gives you 180 days to fix the damage. If it's reasonable damage, if it's greater than they will extend it. But their key is once it's turned in, it's identified, it's put on notice by the counties, they want you to start fixing your building. If it's not fixing at a pace or in an intensity that they like, they will come down harder, and they may fine you to accelerate that. So that's kind of where it is. But the fixing of the building is different than the inspection and assessment of the building, because you really have a picture and a verbal written assessment. It doesn't quantify. So there is an intermediate step in this process to address the issues that need to be addressed to satisfy both, I'm going to say, Dade and Broward, and soon to be Palm Beach.
Yeah, I think we're getting some questions about, what is the likelihood that this changes and more counties are going to adopt the same type of program. And I think we would all agree it's pretty high. Well,
I'm going to make an analogy. Hurricane Andrew hit in the middle of nowhere in Dade County, and it changed the whole building code for the state.
Yeah.
So what's going to happen? I was in St. Petersburg a couple of weeks ago, and those buildings, in St. Pete Beach, Madeira Beach, that area are 30, 40 years old. This is going to be a statewide thing. It has to do with concrete absorbing salt water and attacking the internal steel components. And I think that, it's been a long time, and not to say that the incident down at Champlain Towers, but that's going to be the catalyst to get everyone in line and start the actually building department having more teeth to regulate and to force you to maintain the building.
Tim, you said the structural integrity of the building and the electrical systems one report still? We have to contract 2 engineers or one firm that has 2 expertise, that level of expertise, or how would you recommend we do that?
I don't know a structural engineer that is an electrical engineer, and I've never met one, but yes, no, it's 2 separate entities. And, and I'm just going to kind of in general terms,
Yeah,
the structure is for collapse, integrity, catastrophic, to avoid catastrophic things to happen. And electrical is fire.
right.
2 life safety issues that, and so we all know some of the wiring and the fuses that they don't make them for older buildings, and they're trying to avoid having a life safety issue such as a fire. So absolutely, it's an integral part. Very rarely, if you will the it goes to the main fuses and the old aluminum wiring and things of that nature that. Yeah, it is 2 separate disciplines. There are engineering firms, multidiscipline engineering firms that can both do it in the house. So,
Right. And so now we require repairs. What type of role do you play in that process?
well, our firm, and I've been doing this for 35 years. So we would do the inspection, we would formulate the quantification of the damage, present that to the board. They may have some input as to how we phase it or what the prioritization is, with the engineer calling out the integrity issues. And I'm not a proponent that a surface spall on balcony in 802 is a significant structural issue. That is a maintenance issue. But the ground floor columns around the pool deck that are spalling and cracked, those are a priority. So we would prioritize that and then bid them out that way. We would act as put out a bid to them, the specifications, pre-bid meeting, analyze the bids, and then present to the board. And then, of course, while it's happening in front of the city, I'm a threshold inspector, which is an integral part for the associations that are large. Over 5 stories, over a certain square feet, they have to have threshold engineers doing even though a structural engineer is qualified to do the inspection, a threshold engineer has to inspect a threshold building. So that's another qualification level that has to be achieved. And then we start the work. There also probably is going to be a part of the city or the municipality that is going to be timely reported on the ongoing work. So it's not going to be report to the county. They give you 180 days, and in 180 days, they come out and say what's going on with your building. They're probably going to have, biweekly or monthly ongoing certification so they can track what's happening, and making sure that the identified issues are taken care of.
If just to go off script a little bit here, but if I'm starting this process in year 35, it certainly buys me time. I have until the 180 day constraint doesn't really fit, right? I have 180 days from the time the report is issued, or from the 40-year deadline.
That starts at the 40 years. So let's just say you're at 38 years. We do an inspection and we come up with a fair sized job. You can submit this early at 38 years. I mean, there's no reason to wait to repair your building when there are issues to wait till the 40 years. You can turn in at 38, and then it will just start, at 48 and 58. So you have the 10-year cycle. Right. And the city will be more lenient. Right now, you can only imagine the position the municipalities have with the number of buildings that are non-compliant and moving forward. Generally, the government in implementing, if you will, the hurricane codes, and they overextend, as Jeff mentioned. So they're probably going to be potentially a little more critical, a little bit more tighter than they should be, but it's for the safety of the public and the well-being of the public. So, I'm just expecting hopefully somewhere in between.
Right. And once you're engaged, and I know it depends on the size of the building and stuff, but how long, what's the timeline? How long are we looking at? A 6-month process for you or an engineer to come in and do the inspections, write the report? Like, what do you think?
Well, right now, Dade County put a 45-day
Yeah,
where you get a report, which I think that those who have signed up early are probably going to get it, but because of the number of buildings, especially in Dade and Broward County, that could be difficult. I'm going to say that from the date of inspection, you should receive a report by 45 days. So the question is, if that's a reasonable expectation,
right.
seeing how far it goes. And then that report is again, a visual confirmation of the structural integrity and identification of the issues that may or may not be in question. That doesn't mean that immediately we can go to bid. So, that takes time to quantify. So for me, I have kind of said my initial assessment of the building is going to be a walkthrough and make I don't want to say a minor report, but we're going to identify the issues and present them to the board as soon as possible, because quite frankly, if there are no issues, you're covered. If there are issues, then you can start moving forward with the implementation of repairs,
Right.
which is the key important part to become recertified, if you will.
And I think
And,
it's important, Jeff, go
Craig,
ahead.
I wanted to mention something that Tim had said and add on that in Miami-Dade, you've got 90 days from the date of receiving the city's letter telling you need that engineering. So to Tim's point, it certainly does make sense to be in touch with the association's deadline so that you're in front of that, because we know it's going to be hard to comply now. So you should really start early.
Yeah, and I think, guys, we all know sometimes things like this involving huge costs move at a snail's pace from a board standpoint. So even more important to communicate to start the process earlier than later. Lisa, I want to ask us, actually, before I get that, Tim, everyone wants to know about cost. I know it's a moving target, but what can you tell us what factors you consider when you're doing an estimate of what it's going to cost? One, to do the first phase, which is your inspection. And then two, I think it's just probably based on time and attendance with respect to evaluating the bids on a regular, or not the bids, but the work in progress. But can you answer that question that's on everybody's mind who hasn't budgeted for this?
And we did talk about it in setting up this meeting. And if you just go with 100-unit condo, plus or minus from there, the evaluation of the building is probably somewhere, depending on the size of units, if we're going to do all the balcony or random sampling, but you're probably looking at somewhere between 5 to 10 grand, plus or minus. And that goes up to a larger building because, quite frankly, you've got to access more areas. You have to write a report that may be a couple grand to get a report together. So you're looking at the $7,000 to $12,000 range and it goes up from there. The compiling of repair specifications, quantifications, that probably is in the $10,000 range, plus or minus. And again, as we discussed, and I want to qualify this, it's very,
I don't want to put you on the spot here
to put this out there. And I'm also going to say, and I mentioned this, is, this is an opportunity for this industry, and I'm going to say the engineering industry, to inflate costs, just because of the supply and demand. So I'm putting that out there. So you guys, the sooner you get it, it's going to be cheaper. And also too, is that, a lower price is better that, it's not what it's worth, and something totally expensive or outrageous, you need to get a second opinion or second bid. So it's not cheap, but what you want to do it is one time and get it taken care of, and get it taken care of properly.
I think that's great guidance. And I appreciate you giving us those ranges, because it is something that everybody is trying to get an understanding of. So I think your guidance is a good one. We always look for good value, and whatever you're doing, the cheapest isn't always the best. You can probably get someone to do it for cheap, but we're talking about life safety here, and it's probably not, a spot you really want to skimp a little bit.
And again, if I could,
yeah,
a lot of the people that are on here today probably have maintained their buildings. So the key is if you did a concrete restoration, or have done several over the years, and the last one was done 3 or 4 years ago, and my residents are all up in arms, they want to check, a full-blown 40-year recertification survey and report may not have to happen
Right.
to suffice to identify the structural elements or recertify the project. So that's what I'm out there saying. There are, many avenues, but when you hit the 40-year, kind of now it locks it into where you have to follow.
A quick question on the scope. For the electrical side, are you going into units?
Yes, you are going to have to go all the main power. A lot of large buildings have FP&L vaults in their building. Some of the older ones, their main panels, their electrical rooms, and absolutely to go see the electrical fuse boxes or the panels in the individual units, because you have to get a feel for that. It's part of the system, i.e. the same as structure. You can't do a 40-year and not go on a balcony, not go look at their glazing. Remember, the exterior envelope of the building, from all the hurricane knowledge that we gained since Andrew, is a structural component.
Right.
So you can have a concrete structure, but the envelope be weak and essentially disintegrate, leaving only the concrete structure.
Right. Wow, scary stuff. Lisa, let me jump to you for a second. Tim identified that you have to have everything done by 40 years. If the building passes its 40-year birthday and you're not done, Tim, I think you mentioned fines, but Lisa, can you tell us from a legal standpoint, do we have any flexibility here?
Well, typically your timelines are actually triggered by the letter, and building departments, counties, they're not infallible. So just this week I received 40-year recertification requirements for 2 buildings that were from 1979, and one building, it was a 1960 building, but it was converted to condo in 1981. So again, your timelines for compliance with the county are different than your timeline for compliance with knowing that you live in a safe structure.
Right.
Building departments are generally very sympathetic to the timeline that it requires to engage in a significant repair. I mean, think about it. It's not really all that easy. You have the engineer who prepares the report. Then the engineer has to prepare the specifications for the repair. Then you have to go out to bid. And so you invite your bidders to tour the property. That's a process in and of itself. And the board has to make a selection. But during that entire time, depending on your cost factors and what monies are available to you, you also have to think about your funding. So 180 days, it sounds like 6 months, it sounds like a long time, but it's definitely not a long time. And then right now, of course, we're experiencing overload on the contractors and the engineers. So you have to take those considerations into account as well.
Okay. And then, Jeff, this is a legal process largely, right? Compliance with the law. What role do you as an association attorney play in this, helping our associations through it?
Well, the first one will be to suggest to the condominiums out there that are not yet 10 years old. You might want to consider reaching out to an engineer, because in Florida, you have a 10-year statute of repose, which means a hard deadline of, typically a statute of limitations is from the time you knew or should have known of a problem, and then you can go back to the culpable party. But in Florida, once 10 years has passed, that's it. Developer, general contractor, you're not going to be able to go after them after the statute of repose, which is going to be 10 years. Typically, you want to be conservative from the temporary date of the temp CO was issued. So maybe you want to have someone look at your building, someone like Tim in year 9, just to give it a once over, look at the balconies, the spalling starting, things like that. And then maybe every 10 years thereafter, just from a planning perspective, that also might make sense. I know I'd feel better living in a high-rise building if I had someone like Tim looking at it every 10 years or so. That's issue number 1. Issue number 2, involve the attorney early. If you've already hired Tim, and Tim, no disrespect in any way, shape, or form, I can't help you negotiate that contract. What if Tim, who you're paying, hypothetically, I'll make it up as I go, $10,000 for the work that the engineer is doing, but God forbid it creates a $4 million problem where, will you have recourse? Contracts, another important one. So if Tim would be instrumental in both scoping out what needs to be repaired and helping select a contractor by preparing the bid package, so the board can ultimately make that decision as to which contractor is appropriate. If you then go to the attorney after Tim has done that and after the board has already sent out the bid package, you missed a great opportunity. Here's why. Contractor is going to use the AIA contract, and you will hear all over the place, it's a fair contract, it's a fair contract. You know what? I like fair contracts, but I like my associations to be better protected. How about a contract that reads in plain English, that a board member could actually read it, follow it, understand it without having to reference 18 different sections to finish one sentence like the AIA contract? I'm exaggerating a little bit, but it's an unwieldy, difficult contract to follow. So if you go to the attorney, I have a special base contract. It can go into a bid package so that when the contractor is bidding, he already has seen, or she has already seen, the contract that is going to form the base of the relationship between the contractor and the association. You should save up and reserve now. You know these costs living in this building are going to be there. So as part of your preparation, you need to start saving for this, for these expenditures. And you should have a routine maintenance program in effect. That's why I started with maybe every 10 years, maybe, you know, because of the statute of repose. So you had your building once given a good once over turnover, then maybe fast forward into year 9, 9.5, and then maybe every 10 years. And then you can do deeper inspections as the circumstances may warrant.
Okay, well, Jeff, I appreciate that. We're going to talk a little bit more about that when we get into the next phase of our presentation. But before we get there, Tim, what can you just give our audience, you know, some of the best practices an association should follow to prevent, you know, this type of circumstance?
Well, for one is you need to hire a professional to come out on a regular basis to come out and evaluate the building. Secondly, when there is a concrete restoration done for the building, you need to provide preventatives, which would be, you need to waterproof horizontal surfaces. You need to incorporate anode, galvanic anode or sacrificial anode material to try to avoid the spread of the, or halo effect of the repair areas.
Tim, could you put that in English, please? What was that
Yeah,
word?
I was going to say that. I'm a CPA.
Sacrificial anode. It'd be equivalent to the anode that you put on your outboard motor. You can embed those in a repair because
You want to like put zinc so you don't get electrolysis?
yes, I mean, there's a, what I call it, it looks like an oatmeal colored hockey puck in the pour. And what it will do is, between the old and new concrete, the potential from the different materials, it will absorb it by the zinc and deplete the zinc and not cause the rebar to rust. Commonly used, we use it along doors. Is, I'm sure all the people on this said, we're not going into units. We want to stop at the doors. We don't want to go in. Well, you know, structurally you should go in a lot of times, but if it's not, you still are putting new material next to old material with the moisture coming off the doors. You should embed these zinc anodes. So preventative measures are going to give the association waterproof, always waterproof, are going to give the association the longest life of their repairs, and that's going to ultimately save them money.
You know, we learned in Property Management 101 that painting is your friend. You know, it protects the building envelope. Is that good guidance? Make sure you paint on a timely basis.
Well, now the painting, now they have upwards of 10-year paints, and you can get wind-driven rain warranties from these contractors. The problem is that you're painting a vertical surface for the most part, and then you have a hole in it which contains a window. So if you don't have a sound window, or you don't have sealants that really close the metal stucco gap, you have an open hole to let water into your system. So for me, the most important part of the painting project is really the reapplication of the sealants, is the removal of existing and reapplication, because quite frankly, that is the first part of that exterior envelope that's going to deteriorate in UV light. So yes, but the paint nowadays is really the first line of defense, and it runs the water down to the horizontal balcony surfaces that may or may not be waterproof. So
right. So, okay. Listen, Tim, that's great stuff. I know you present a lot of reports to boards. What do you think is the biggest mistake they make after getting their report?
Looking at the dollar figure. It's the first, what I call the shock value. And part of one of my, and Jeff and I went to a project not too long ago where we went into a board meeting where we were presenting, and one of the things we said is, let's not talk about cost until the end.
Mm.
You know, it is about identifying the need, trying to convince the masses that there is an issue, and then when we feel like we have, you know, not we have to give them the cost, but be able to tell them that the cost is not the deterrent. The cost is the requirement to implement the repairs. I find it when I go in and I'm hired to do an evaluation of a building, and not having known the building 2 or 3 months before, and I come in and I say, look, you got $2.5 million worth of work to fix it. They literally fold up shop. Well, don't call us, we'll call you.
Right.
I want to go through so you understand where the priorities are. We don't have to waterproof the pool deck at this point, but we've got to fix the columns over here because that's a main structural element. Those are the things. So it's really an important part is not to just think about it as a dollar value, because fixing the building is ultimately going to save you money. And again, too, as everyone knows, this is like a cancer. If you see it today and you don't address it, it's going to be worse tomorrow. It's going to be worse in 2 years. So maintaining a building on a regular basis and trying to keep the costs low is a priority for the association.
I appreciate that. And Jeff, certainly if the engineer makes a recommendation and you choose not to act, you're setting yourself up for trouble, are you not?
You certainly could be.
Yeah.
You certainly could be.
Okay.
Well, let me add to that,
Yeah,
if you don't
Lisa,
mind,
sure.
because nobody wants our individual director volunteers to be subjected to personal liability. It's hard enough to find people that are willing to volunteer and to spend the time and undertake the effort in volunteer board service. But the statute, the condo statute specifically says that if board members engaged in willful, wanton, or reckless disregard of the safety of persons or property, then there is exposure there to personal liability. So for those directors out there that really their only goal is to kick the can down the road because they don't want to be the bad guy and levy the assessment, they don't want to be the bad guy and have to drive through construction debris for 6 months or longer and the like, or maybe their personal finances are not capable of undertaking the additional expense, but you have to put the best interests of the association ahead of your own personal interests when you serve as a fiduciary, and that's what our board members are.
Absolutely. And to add to that just a little bit, remember the standard by which the board is going to be judged is reasonable business judgment. So were your actions reasonable in light of perhaps what was in the engineer's report? And if you ignore it, you're setting yourself up for an argument that you acted recklessly.
Right. And setting yourself up and the association for some serious exposure.
Yeah.
Okay, well, Tim, that is fantastic stuff. I want to move on, everyone, to building maintenance. We're part of the end of the recertification process is a regular schedule of maintenance and how that gets done in your building. So I wanted to move on to that. More of a general concept of building maintenance. And Lisa, I wanted to start with you. We're all governed by 718, 719, or 720. Can you set out for us what the statute says regarding our requirement to maintain the building? Let's start with that.
Well, you do have those fiduciary obligations. So Jeff and I both talked about your fiduciary obligations, but the community association statutes really are void of any standards for maintenance and repair of the buildings. That being said, there are other statutes that govern community association operations. And I mentioned it, chapter 553 of the Florida statutes is the building code. And the building code is designed so that all buildings are capable of use and occupancy in a safe manner, not only by the residents or occupants or users in the case of a commercial building, but also in respect to firefighters or other life safety personnel that have to respond to emergencies. So you'll see every city, every municipality, every county has their own sections of the building codes, and those codes are going to include maintenance requirements or in the minimum consequences for failure to address unsafe structures.
And then, Jeff, there are no formal requirements for a building inspections, but I know there's some history there. Can you kind of take us through it?
Absolutely. In 2008, there was a bill sponsored by legislator Rubino. And in this bill, which ultimately became law, as to any condominium building greater than 3 stories, at least every 5 years, and within 5 years, if not available for inspection, et cetera, the board shall have the condominium building inspected to provide a report under the seal of an architect or engineer authorized to practice in the state, attesting to required maintenance, useful life, and replacement cost of common elements. And the statute goes on. For reasons unknown, in 2010, another legislature with the last name of Aubuchon, Aubuchon. I'm not familiar with this particular individual. I'm told he was a builder. During the legislative process in House Bill 663 in 2010, we just have a one-line sentence. And that one line says repeal section 718.113 sub 6 relating to the required 5-year inspections of condominium improvements. So we had it, they took it away. What was the motivation? Where did it come from? Haven't been able to find any real good history on it yet.
Interesting. But right now, you don't have to do anything other than using your best business judgment in making
Reasonable business judgment. Yeah.
reasonable business judgment, excuse me. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about building maintenance. There's really 2 buckets, right? There's the ongoing regular maintenance, which is funded in the annual operating budget. And then there's kind of the one-time non-routine maintenance items that are typically funded through reserves. We know we have associations that don't fund reserves. That's a separate set of problems. You really have 2 outlets at that point, a special assessment if you have something, or you borrow the money and you pay it over time. But from a regular, I want to look at those 2 buckets. So from a regular maintenance standpoint, we're getting a lot of comments along the lines of, we know there's work to be done, but the community doesn't want to raise the maintenance fees. Often the response is just to defer the maintenance. So Jeff, I'm going to ask you, how would you guide the board in addressing, this particular challenge?
Well, as you said that, in the back of my mind, the word tough, I just wanted to say tough. Do it. Tough luck, you live in a building, it needs regular maintenance. The fact that you don't want to do it because it's expensive, that becomes a life safety issue very, very quickly at times. You can't kick that bucket down the road. You really need to consider having a reserve, not for that one-off $7 million concrete restoration project. That's what we have these special assessments for when we need them, God forbid. But we know we're going to have required maintenance on the way. So why not reserve a few extra dollars for that concrete routine maintenance that can take place on a yearly or bi-yearly basis so that you're keeping up with the building over time? It sure would make a whole lot more sense, I think, to do that. You have to be real in your planning process. And just kicking it down the road just doesn't really help anybody at all. And really what it does is it takes the financial burden off the people living there. In other words, I'm going to live here for 20 years, then sell the building. Why should I save money for the roof? I'm not going to be here when we need the new roof. So that means you get the benefit of the roof the whole time you live there, but never paid for its continued maintenance. And that doesn't seem like a fair thing to do either.
Yeah, I think we're going to talk about reserves. I think you're right. Often we find it's the vocal minority who are the ones lashing out at the board. How can you raise my maintenance? But it's not the non-vocal majority who want to live in a safe environment. $10 a month isn't going to make a difference. And we get into that vocal minority. I think strong boards overcome that and weaker boards concede to that argument sometimes. You led me into reserve, which is the next thing I want to talk about, because that's the other bigger bucket. And Lisa, if you can you remind us what 718 and 720 talk to us about doing a reserve study?
Well, while there's no requirement to have a reserve study, in condos and co-ops, the board of directors is responsible to adopt a budget that contains a fully funded reserve schedule. Now, a reserve schedule must be based on empirical information. So if you have a reserve schedule that is a complete fallacy or doesn't have any basis in reality whatsoever, not only are you kidding yourself and you're not preparing yourself for the future needs of the building, but you're also misleading purchasers and other unit owners. We have to talk about the real cost of ownership. Just because you can afford the mortgage on a $400,000, $500,000, $600,000 apartment doesn't mean that you can absorb all of the costs of ownership. And if you had a single family home, those would be your costs completely. Now, in a single family home, you have a lot more discretion. You might be the person that puts the bucket under the space in the kitchen where the roof leaks, or, not attend to tiles that have fallen off the roof, or your painting, could be peeling, but you don't have the luxury of having unbridled discretion when you are a member of the board of directors. And the same is true for all of the owners that live there as well. So while the statutes require the association to adopt a budget containing a fully funded reserve schedule, I often find that those reserve schedules are not adequate. There are warnings in the statute that must be applied to votes to waive reserves in the condo and co-op context. And on the HOA side, the year-end financial report has to contain a big, bold disclosure about reserves. If there aren't reserves or inadequate reserves, to warn purchasers and current owners what expenditures may be necessary as a result of their lack of planning. Who said it? Benjamin Franklin? Failure to plan is a plan to fail. Is that what it is?
I don't know. I'm an accountant, so it's history completely. And I'm a Canadian, so I have no idea.
I thought it was a failure to plan on your part does not constitute an emergency on my part.
That is, I've heard that. I don't think that was Ben
Franklin.
Franklin, but I've heard that. I want to talk a little bit more about reserves, but before I get in there, Ness, can you post poll question number 2? It's a 2-part question. 1, does your association rely on a formal reserve study to estimate its reserve contributions? And then how does your association prepare a reserve study? So Jeff, while our listeners are answering that question, the statute sets out specific items that have to be included in reserves, I believe.
And that's Chapter 718 does, the condo area. Yes.
So can you tell us about those, and then specifically talk about concrete restoration? Because Tim talked about that, and I don't think it fits in the bucket.
Understood. In the statute, it references, you're going to reserve for the roof, paving, and painting, and then anything else with where the cost is going to be greater than $10,000. I like the old language where it was greater than $10,000 and maintenance and repair was more than annually. I don't think that didn't make it into the statute, but I like that added component to it. There is no requirement. The legislation doesn't use the word have a concrete reserve, but we know it's going to be greater than $10,000. So should there be, and I think there has to be a balance between that $16 million, God forbid, restoration project, which is probably not something you're going to be able to reserve for, as compared to the ongoing maintenance issues where the repair costs are smaller, so that you have, a pool of money, maybe $250,000 or up to $1 million even, saved over 10, 20 years, so that you can deal with the maintenance of your building without having to go back to the membership every time. So if you just plan for a few dollars in your annual budget to create that concrete reserve and fund it appropriately, I think your building is going to be better maintained. And what do we know about better maintained building with healthy reserves? Better sale prices. It's not rocket science.
No, for sure. And then Jeff, just so we had a question come in. Is it reasonable for me to pay for an engineering study out of my reserve budget, or a reserve study out of my reserves if I have pooled reserves?
Well, it really depends. If they just changed it, right? What's in the pool? So you can only spend reserve monies on those items that are appropriate for that reserve. If I had a client with in the pool, it provided for specifically engineering, obviously it wouldn't be a question at all. If we're dealing with, let's say, the roof, and we need a roofer and a full-blown roof inspection, and we have a reserve, is it an appropriate expense? It would seem like it very well might be, but you can only use the reserve for its intended purpose, absent a vote of the membership to authorize it. So really what needs to happen, whoever asked that question, is you need to go back to the association's attorney and get a clean bill of health that yes, you can, or no, you can't.
Right. Okay. Tim, I think you're probably falling asleep there on us, so I wanted to just
I'm listening.
reel you back into the discussion quickly. Do engineering firms prepare reserve studies? We know they're reserve specialists. We've all read about them, but do you get involved in this game? And how does your kind of product differ than what you might see from a reserve specialist?
We get in, we do reserve studies, and for certain aspects, and where we don't, like, let's say the life of the elevator, you can get bids to replace and figure out the life and how much is a replacement cost. For exterior facade, window replacement, railings, things of that nature, we have done that. I think that what I have found is generally the reserve studies overestimate remaining life. So if you have a roof that's 15 years old and it's a 20-year roof and you still have 15 years on your reserve, you're underfunded.
Right.
So, in general, we're the bad guy. We bring it back to reality and tell them where it is, and, don't call us, we'll call you, is what we get.
Right. Same program. Not very popular, kind of like a dentist.
But it's amazing that, and I'm going to tell you that it's kind of turning. I'm getting more and more people, we want to know the number because we've been burned already. We have already been underfunded, or we did an elevator upgrade or whatever we had to do, and it was significantly wrong. We had to special assess, and it makes them look bad. So planning, proper planning and doing it properly is going to turn out the best for everybody.
I was saying. Okay, Nez, will you share the results of the poll? And then I'm going to run through, we're going to run a little late, but I do want to go through kind of our best practices quickly before we wind down here. So does your association rely on a formal reserve study to estimate its reserve contributions? 67% yes, 24% no, 9% don't know. So it looks like the majority of people are looking at a formal reserve study. And the second question was, if you rely on a formal reserve study, who prepared it? And we see there that the majority is prepared by a reserve specialist. Some engage the services of their engineer. I always profess at least some point in time, use your engineer. They're out kicking the tires. They're probably doing a more thorough review. It is more expensive, but I think good value. So, okay, Ness, thanks for sharing that. Guys, I just want to run through kind of a summary of our discussion today and look at some of the best practices. So what I garnered from this was have great people on your team, whether they are your on-site team who are, in the building every day or on your site every day, looking at the potential challenges, and then have great professional advisors, have a strong attorney, have a Tim, an engineer who is a partner with the association. So I think for us, it starts with great people. I think one of the lessons, Tim, you just said was do what is right versus what is least expensive. Sticker shock is going to happen. But as a board, you should be, leading down the association down a path to doing what's right. Fix what needs to get fixed. Do what needs to be done, as we said. I will say that the next one I had is have a professionally prepared reserve report to drive appropriate funding. You might as well know. You can vote to not fund reserves, but I think the worst thing is to go in, not go in eyes wide open. Know that the exposure is this. I laugh at boards sometimes who want to move out the estimated life of a roof because they're a roof expert, and they just really don't know. So have a professionally prepared engineering or reserve study. Don't defer painting. Paint is your friend. Building envelope integrity is the best defense against concrete erosion. I think, Tim, that's one of the things you said. And then the last thing I had was engage in a robust strategic business planning cycle. So as a board, you're responsible not only for the resident experience, what it's like to live there, but you are responsible for running the business of the associations. And businesses have strategic planning cycle. They have a 1-year plan, a 1-year budget. The plan talks about what needs to get done, and the budget talks about how it's going to get funded. They have a 3-year plan, short-term plan, a 5-year midterm plan. And again, I think the old statute said you should do a formal reserve study, engineering study every 5 years. That's probably a good time frame. And then have a 10-year plan, a long-range plan. And I think what we talked about was, have an engineer involved every 10 years at a minimum, maybe more frequently if they identified issues, but don't go past 10 years with really having an engineering study done. So I wanted to leave those kind of best practices with our listeners. Tim and Lisa and Jeff, I wanted to really thank you for your time. Tim, I really appreciate your insight into the certification process and building maintenance. Jeff and Lisa, always a pleasure to have you. I wanted to thank all of our participants this afternoon, and and wish everybody a wonderful afternoon. Tim, travel safely. I know you're on the road.
Thanks for
Okay,
having me.
thank you very much.
Okay, take care, everybody.
Thank you.